All right, everyone. This isn't so much a news story as a topic that I will probably repeatedly come back to. I've talked about this a little bit before, but I might just end up making a series out of it because it's just so obnoxious. Um, but obviously, if you've been reading the news at all, you will have seen the very strong push to convince people in the West to eat the bugs. Um, and it's getting extremely obnoxious at this point. And honestly, it's dangerous. And I've talked about this before on some news articles, but because it's something that it just comes up every day, I figured I would start going into a deeper dive into this subject of why you shouldn't be eating the bugs. Um, because there is, the fundamental disgust that people have towards insects, people in the West have towards insects, and that level of disgust is not arbitrary. Insects are disgusting. As someone who has worked with insects basically my entire adult life, um, they are foul, foul creatures. The general public doesn't really understand just how disgusting they are. We associate them with filth, especially like flies and maggots and stuff. But even, caterpillars are really disgusting, and you wouldn't want to eat these as is. Like, if it was something that you were going to eat, you would want kind of an extreme level of preparation on these things in order to be comfortable with them. And so I wanted to go into more depth into the subject because it is becoming absurd. So, this is probably the latest big article that's come out and it's from the Telegraph, which is a British paper. Public will get bugged for eating insects under government-backed drive. And the government is pushing this. Governments in all Western countries are pushing this hard. And they have been, as far as I can tell, since 2013 is when it started. 2015 is when it really started ramping up. And since COVID, it's just 2020, it's just been obnoxious. These articles get published every day. If you just, Google News, search eating insects, edible insects, eating bugs, whatever, and just look for the last 24 hours, you will get an article from some major news organization every day. And they usually just pass around the same articles. They change some of the words, change the author or whatever. At this point, I'm not even sure half these authors are real people and not just AI generated articles. And they sort of just pass around this propaganda because at this point, that's what it is. It's nothing but glowing reviews for insects, or glowing reviews about the government push to eat more insects and all this other nonsense. But it's become constant, and it's not going to relent anytime soon. So I figured I would start with part of this is just kind of the change in tone of articles. So the Telegraph is a British paper, and it's generally considered fairly conservative. And they're still pushing this hard with this article about the nudge campaign for getting people to eat this. We're going to start sneaking it into food, cricket meal into food and all this other stuff, and that's a good thing, and you'll like this, and it's just horrible. But if we go back to, this is 9 years ago, so this is October 2014, and this is from The Guardian. The Guardian is considered a very progressive newspaper, and they were, again, glowingly talking about this. But even in the glowing, the glowing after, what is it? The glow of the British progressive movement embracing this disgusting habit, even they spend a very large portion of the article talking about how bad eating insects can be. About that the insects live in filth frequently. They are frequently feed even on farms, industrial scale farms. They frequently live in filth. They are generally fed scraps or agricultural waste or manure in order to grow on. They carry an enormous amount of parasites. There are many species which are considered quote unquote edible, which carry a lot of toxins. They tend to bioaccumulate toxins. So kind of like the problem with eating too much tuna, in that they bioaccumulate mercury because as they feed on smaller fish, that have a lot of toxins in them, and they don't break down the toxin, they just accumulate in their fat tissues. Insects do the same thing, but with agricultural toxins. And so things like Mexican crickets tend to have extremely high lead content, enough to easily poison you. A lot of these caterpillars are extremely poisonous because of the plants that they feed on. A lot of insects that are fed on agricultural waste. That waste will be infested with fungus like aspergillus, and that produces an aflatoxin. That aflatoxin then bioaccumulates in the insects, and then you eat the insects, and now you have liver poisoning because of all the aflatoxin. Even they, back in 2014, acknowledged the risk that eating insects caused, including the severe allergies that people have to insects because of the tropomyosin proteins, which are basically the same that you find in shellfish. So if you're allergic to shellfish, you will almost certainly be allergic to insects if you tried to eat them. None of this is talked about anymore in the newer articles. In the newer articles, it's just nothing but, how do we trick the public into eating this? Oh my God, isn't this such a great idea? Everyone should be doing this. There's no danger acknowledged with this. So if you want to actually read articles about the problems with eating insects, you need to specifically, internet search for articles that are older than 2015, because starting in like 2013 is when the UN began pushing for more edible insects. The West needs to embrace edible insects, and it just every year ratchets up more and more and more. But what I found interesting is that if you do start going back, you will actually find scientific literature about why you shouldn't eat the bugs. That is very concerning. So this came from a bunch of veterinarian researchers. The parasitological evaluation of edible insects and the role in the transmission of parasitic diseases to humans and animals. This is on the National Library of Medicine, PubMed. And basically what they found is that in local and international animal, what would you call them, farms, rearing facilities, things like that, and they were looking at crickets and mealworms and roaches, the things that everyone is pushing that we eat. They were overwhelmingly infested with parasites. And not just like, oh, we found E. coli bacteria or we found salmonella bacteria, which are almost universally present on all of these things. And you would associate, cooking, you would need to cook these to get rid of that. But these were complex parasites. These were spore-forming parasites. These were protist parasites. These were parasitic worms. These were parasitic arthropods. And something like 80% of all of the farms that they looked at had parasite infestations of some kind. And in 30% of cases, these were human parasites that were infesting these insects. And they go, you can read this, I've already read all this, but it is extremely concerning. In this prevalence section, they go through all of the parasites they found. And it's just this incredibly long list of parasites. And again, these aren't bacteria, these aren't viruses. These are protists, these are fungi, these are parasitic worms, these are parasitic arthropods, complex parasites, extremely, extremely common. And things that are not easy to get rid of by merely cooking. A lot of these are heat resistant or cold resistant spore forming parasites that you can't really be sure that you've killed just by a quick cook. That definitely, if these are just like dried and you want to microwave them or whatever, will definitely not kill. And that you would be exposing yourself to. And none of this information is ever talked about. If you go down further, they talk about this disgusting thing. During the research in individual farms, we observed unethical practices of individual breeders, such as feeding insects with animal feces from a pet shop, feeding insects with corpses of smaller animals, or feeding insects with moldy food and even raw meat. These practices significantly reduce the quality of the final product and undermine the microbiological parasitological safety of such food. What is actually fairly concerning with this is a lot of this is, one, it's done in Western countries, but also a lot of this is being done on farms that they were looking at from international sources, because a lot of quote unquote edible insects are imported from Africa and Asia because it's cheaper. And Western nations have absolutely no say in how this, any of these rearing facilities or how, food safety standards or any of this crap. And it's absolutely disgusting. But what's otherwise interesting is they talk about somewhat of, at least briefly, well, you can mitigate some of this by feeding the insects fresh produce and better diets and this, that, and the other. But that is far too expensive to make this affordable. If you're going to be feeding your insects fresh produce, why not just feed people fresh produce? Why do you need to feed it to the insects first? This is absurd. And it would be extremely expensive. The entire, eco argument for eating insects is less greenhouse gases, but also, well, we can feed them agricultural waste, we can feed them human waste, we can feed them garbage. But if you're going to be doing that, all of that filth, all of those parasites, all that bacteria, all those toxins that are in your waste are going to be recycled back into your diet, and you're going to be eating them. It's absolutely filthy. And the one thing that people never talk about, because they're like, well, in some of these articles they'll talk about, well, you eat shrimp, why don't you eat cockroaches? So this is something that I have a problem with shellfish in general with this, but I also have a problem with insects in particular. So let's say that you have a shrimp. Here's its tail. Oh, look, I'm a shrimp. When you prepare shrimp, you have to devein. And there is, quote unquote, a vein that runs down the back here that you pull out. That is not a vein, it is its digestive system. And in shrimp, it's fairly small, but you have to remove this because it's full of feces. And it's disgusting, and you don't need feces. With things like edible mealworms and edible crickets and all that other stuff, they do not devein them. And with something like a caterpillar or a mealworm, so you'll have the head, you'll have the thoracic segments, and then you'll have the abdominal segments. Terrible drawing, I know. Here's its googly eyes and its antennae. In a shrimp, the digestive tract that you devein is very small. It's still full of shit, but it's fairly small. In a larval insect, the digestive tract is enormous. It takes up the majority of the interior of the insect. And for the general public, they would not know this. They would think, well, it's a tiny little stomach or whatever. It isn't. It's huge. And in almost every larval insect, it is packed full of feces. I mean, enormous quantities of feces. And none of this is removed upon the preparation of these insects for eating. They are just either cooked or dried full, and you just eat whatever its contents are. And it's it's absolutely disgusting. But if people will say, well, it's cooked. If I were to serve you cooked sewage, you wouldn't eat it. But it's cooked. Oh, it's safe. It's not safe. And you know it's not safe. It is disgusting. You wouldn't want to eat these things. But we don't really talk about those things. So I'm going to probably keep bringing this up. Don't eat the bugs. Don't listen to the Western governments with this. Don't listen to the UN. Don't listen to any of these people. If you go back 10 years, there were 10 years and longer, there were obvious articles written about the dangers of eating insects. None of this is ever brought up, and it's not going to be brought up anymore because it is inconvenient. So I'm going to stop there, and I'll see you guys later. Thanks, bye.